So this time, let's talk about the controller that comes with the Explosive RPG character pack. The full pack is kind of expensive at $99.99 or $100. Although I definitely bought it when it was on a 50% sale, which at the time of this recording, it's November. I'm sure soon is going to be the Black Friday, Cyber Monday type deals going on, so a good time to pick it up. There is a free version of this pack, which is labeled free. Nice bold letters. It actually comes with quite a bit of animations for being free. 80 animations. I don't think it used to always have that many. But it comes with the unarmed fighting and the two-handed sword stuff, which is quite a lot. You can tell when you look at the package here. Animations, we got two-handed sword, unarmed. So you could get your basic controller down using just that, and it comes with the same code bits of the controller, which I'll go into a little bit more detail on what's inside the controller. And since I know it's part of the free pack, I can feel free, I think, to show as much of that as necessary. So let's take a look at that and see how it works. So I'll start off by taking a look at the demo scene here. One thing that I initially noticed is that the UI is in world space for some reason, which is kind of strange, but you know, whatever. Let's start by just playing it and see how it goes. Make that a little bit bigger. So I can use the WASD as it says. QE rotates the camera pretty quick. Left shift targets. Doesn't seem to do anything. Rigid body, so I can push the boxes. I'm at the ladder, nothing happens. E, no, well, that's rotating. There's this button here, climb ladder. Okay. Now I can press up. And it does not seem to know when the ladder is completed. Climb off top. I click the button and it finished the animation. Interesting. Okay. Jumping. How do I roll? There's no roll button, but there is these buttons to click on. Roll forward. Roll backwards. Roll left. Right. Dodge left. Dodge right. That's pretty cool. Turn left. And right. Here's the unarmed attacks that you can have. I don't know if the free version comes with all the unarmed stuff, even the kicks, but maybe. Jumping, picking stuff up, activating a button. Get hit, die, come back, spells. That's pretty cool. Okay, now the targeting is kind of working. If I hold down shift, he's looking at that target reticle thing, because that is set to the target. Got a ramp to test whether I can walk up it, which it seems to have no problem with. And swimming. very high jump out of the water. Ooh. I got swim up or swim down buttons. Swim up, swim up, swim up, swim up, swim up. Whoa. I can swim up all the way out. Whoa. Okay, so and then here's the two-handed sword, which the free one would come with. So it changes the whole stance of everything. Because he's holding the sword now. Roll backwards. You can still do those things. And you can still kick when you have that sword out. Picking things up with your face. Okay. Activate doesn't seem to be working properly either. Interesting. Two-handed axe. Spear. So for the heretic, I think staff would probably be what we would have. At least that would be our closest move. Oh yes, we have a special attack that... Alright, so if we start to take a look at the character here, we've got selected. We've got several components attached. Super character controller script, RPG character controller, RPG input controller, RPG movement controller, RPG character weapon controller, and then we have your animator, rigid body, capsule glider stuff for physics, movement, and animation. The nav mesh agent, perfect look at, and IK hand. So it comes. There's a lot of things here to understand. Right away, I can speak a little bit about what the nav mesh agent is there for. That's for handling point and click movement. So there should be, yeah, this demo scene already has nav mesh baked, and so even though this is a player character and the nav mesh agent you would normally think of as being AI navigation, but if you want to use point and click pathfinding for like a Diablo style game or something, then having an nav mesh agent handle whether or not you need to walk around this, you know, rock or the pond and what have you is a good way to handle that. So there's a lot of things to look at here, and it ends up seeming to me like a little bit of a rabbit hole. So what I do to try and understand this is look at the instructions, because it does come with some decent documentation, but it's certainly better than nothing. So we can look at here this overview of what these scripts are about. RPG character controller, the main controller. Well, that's not super helpful. Super character controller handles the ground detection and surface interaction. RPG character movement controller is obviously about movement. RPG character input controller, obviously about the input. And the weapon controller contains all the weapon information and handles weapon switching, so it had all the different models in there. Perfect look at is to make the character's head look at a selected target, and then IK hands is to fit weapons to the hands using IK. But as you dig into it, and even looking in Unity here again in the folder structure, the RPG character animation pack has a code folder. In the code folder is where the RPG character controller and input controller and all those things. The super controller is in a whole separate folder, super character controller, with code, materials, textures. Like it's a whole separate package. And it's got state machine and gravity and some math. It has its own README and BSP trees and colliders and all these things. So now we start to get a little complicated. So where we start to have a bit of a rabbit hole, there's super character controller, and it's got its own documentation, so we can read about the different things here. And it looks like it's probably been modified, because I see here's RPG code, or maybe this is by the same person, I don't know. Then we have a link to this blog here, so if we jump over to this blog, you can see some things from quite a few years ago, where he's been working on this character controller and eventually open sourced it to GitHub, or put all the code to GitHub. If we go here, we see the project's archived, no longer maintained, and if you're searching for a robust character controller for Unity, I'd recommend the Kinematic character controller. And last time anything has been done, updated the README a couple of years ago, but the bulk of the work is three or 4 years ago. So right there's one thing that kind of makes me feel like, okay, this is fine for a demo, but I'm not sure if I want to use this in any, production, in my actual projects, because I'm definitely going to be on my own figuring this out, because well, I don't know if the RPG animation pack really supports the super character controller, because it's packaging it. That may be somewhat of a gray area. Yeah, so one of the other things that also gets me about this is it has special collision requirements. Objects with primitive colliders on them, such as sphere, box, or capsule, won't need any additional settings, but any object with a mesh collider needs the BSP tree script attached to it. If you want to control the allowable slope height for the object, you can attach the super collision type script to it as well. So if we look at this, if I can get past the UI here, select this rock, you can see indeed it has a mesh collider, convex, which makes it take like this low poly shape, and that seems like it would normally work just fine for any kind of rigid body collision, but now we have this BSP tree attached, so I'm gonna have to dig into the workings of the super character collider to figure out why it is we need this to detect collisions. And then this ramp, which I recall just trying the demo, it let us go up the slope no problem. I guess it doesn't have the super collider type attached to it. I wonder what happens if I super collision type, and then slope limit, let's change that to 45. I don't know what stand angle means exactly, but slope limit seems Interesting. So now, let's see if I can still walk up this ramp. Yes, I can. What if I stand angle is 45? Well, it definitely made me fall down the ramp. Maybe this angle is less than 45. Yeah, so let's say I can only walk up 35-degree angles and stand on 35-degree angles. Yeah, I can't get up it anymore. Well, so that's interesting. One of the other controllers, the first one, the third-person system, did have the angular limits built into its locomotion controller, and it seems that this has a separate collision component that you put on each element. So the downside to that is that, you know, I have to, as you're developing your level, I'm gonna have to go to each object and say whether or not it's gonna cause, you know, have this problem, as opposed to, and same with, I presume these mesh colliders needing the BSP tree in order to collide with them. So each of the items in the level are going to need to have specific scripts on them in order for the character to interact with them, rather than the character just being able to interact with anything directly. Like this particular ramp here, just, you know, we could set that you can only stand on 35 degrees and you can only walk up 35 degrees, but would we really want that per object? Or that seems like it might be a little bit tedious, rather than having the character only able to go on 35 degrees no matter what it is. And I guess the other thing that would seem like more natural to me would be to put a physics material on this ramp to cause the friction to somehow, you know, make you slide down. And if it was a ramp made of ice or something, then you wouldn't be able to go up the slope. But that, I think, would be even a slightly different interaction, but not like just not being able to walk up this kind of slope. Or maybe it would be something to get around it. Or maybe the best thing would be to have both. You, by default, can set something on the character that you can only go up 35, but then you could put a override script. So if I wanted this to be a very sticky or grippy surface, that in this case, this one particular object, I can go up the angle. So it would be better to be able to apply scripts to objects in the level as the exception, rather than having to do it for each and every thing. And maybe you don't. Maybe I'm overlooking something, but that seems to be the case. And then ladders, we've got, this does seem to be a somewhat typical behavior, where it has a box collider. Okay, so we've got a trigger volume, but I don't see. Usually, you would have like a tag or a layer or something to indicate that this was a ladder. Maybe, hopefully not, but maybe ladder code is looking for the name of the item to contain the word ladder. I don't really know, from looking at this anyway, how you would determine that you were on a ladder here, because there's no tags or anything set. I'll have to look at the code for ladder usage. So taking a look at the code, it looks somewhat pretty clean, I guess. But one thing is that it's huge. If we go down to the bottom here, the main controller is 1,300 plus lines of code. And then, of course, there's multiple things here. We've got the input controller. That one's not too bad, only a little over 100. That's pretty good. It's got all these inputs. For the input system, somewhat hard-coded to specific items, but at least this character input controller, maybe you could replace that. But there's sort of a problem because we've got that one, and is it this one? Let me just search for input. Yeah, so inside the main controller, in spite of having a separate character input controller, we have specific calls to input. Get mouse button down 0. So we're not even using the input system here. We're directly hard coding, shooting a nav mesh to the first mouse button and reload to the second mouse button, and specific keyboard keys are toggling injury, head look, slowing time, pause, and then it's just arrow keys here for movement, looks like, for aiming, and so I think this is somewhat what I would call hard-coded to this particular demo. So as long as you're interested in having the exact same control scheme as they've defined here, then no problem. But if you want to replace the input system, or even use the Unity input system where you can map different things to different axes like this, you know, I don't know why we wouldn't. We have attack L, but why don't we have a shoot? Or I guess the mouse buttons are probably based on getting the nav mesh and where you actually are clicking, so they would have to have some kind of target reticle thing. But some of those other buttons, like what you could have a input injury button, something like that, and run everything through a single input system. And then if the main controller just accesses the input system, then I would only need to replace this. But now I would need to replace multiple things. Even this input controller is hard-coded to, in some cases, to specific keys rather than to buttons in the Unity Input Manager. And then the movement controller, I see. So the movement controller is inheriting a super state machine, which is from that other package, and it also has a reference to super character controller. So it's got quite a bit of dependencies. So the super character controller, I think, is a dependency that's not marked as a required dependency by the main character controller. So if we scroll up to the top of here, it only requires these things. So like looking in Unity, when we have the character selected, it's got the super character controller here, it needs to have that reference. So the movement controller, I think it was the movement controller. Yeah, the movement controller is a super state machine, which I have to take a look at the source to figure out that, or hope that there's something in the documentation or the blog. And then it also has a reference to a super character controller. This one doesn't have any required things, so you have to know that on your own. So the movement controller has dependencies on all kinds of these other systems: the super character controller, RPG character controller, character input controller. So it's modular, but has some tight coupling going on. And then the other thing, of course, is if your game doesn't even need the nav mesh agent moving, like I wouldn't for Heretic 2. Well, if you're not making a Diablo game with that type of movement, then you have to just live with that, based on whether or not it exists conditions. So got a lot of stuff. The movement controller is 700 lines to figure out. Here's that ladder part. On trigger enter. That's what I was wondering about earlier. Entering a water volume. Okay, so for colliding with specifically layer 4, which I think water is one of the hard-coded layers, so that's okay. Yeah, 1, 2, 4. If you look at the tags and layers built in, yeah, 4 is water. So that's okay, at least. Although you might want to use a custom layer and say, call it liquid or something, or swimmable or something like that. If you wanted to have a pool of slime or something, maybe you could call that the water layer still. I don't know. That's a little nitpicky. Okay, so near a ladder. Collide transform parent. It's not equal null. Yeah, okay, so here they are, like I guessed. They are checking that the name of the collider parent specifically, because the trigger was called volume, so the parent of it is called ladder. So RPG movement controller, which I guess is named RPG, this is all specifically geared towards this demo. I mean, we could set up our own levels like this, and just as long as any ladder, we name it ladder, whether it's ladder 1, ladder 2, ladder 3, or as long as it contains the word ladder, then we're gonna try to climb it like a ladder. And we can climb cliffs, I guess. A lot of specific stuff there. Maybe that had something to do with why you didn't get off the ladder, because you had to have have the on trigger exit. Maybe I never left the trigger. It's very curious why the ladder thing didn't work, but obviously that's a little bit flawed. And then this is simple state machine. That's not super state machine. Where's super state machine? Super state machine. Which is just a general state machine, so that's nice. It's something similar to, you know, any state machine that's being implemented in what some of the other systems use. State machine patterns, enter state, exit state, updates, and super update. It's funny naming everything some variant of super. Super math. Bunch of handy math utilities. So it's not horrible to have access to those. There's that super collision type. So all it does is keep those public angles that you attach to something. I guess the collider is going to specifically look for this monobehavior component to be attached to something. Closest point on surface. So I'm guessing that is why we need a BSP tree, is because we're trying to find the closest point on surface with various box sphere, BSP tree, general colliders, and terrain collider. But I guess my problem is I don't understand why we need this. And maybe that's why it's been abandoned. Maybe you don't need this specifically anymore. I thought that all these collisions already happened. Is this something that didn't used to exist in Unity and now has been since taken care of? BSP tree, which puts a mesh collider into a BSP tree, so that's interesting. Maybe that could be useful for something. Borrowed from RPG Mesh class of the RPG controller package by F. Home. It's copyrighted by SlimDX. So this is run the gambit of old school C# game developers. Brute force mesh. So the short of it is, this thing is complicated. It's got a lot to it that I have to figure out with the super character controller. And I'm not sure why I need it. And then these other items seem to be fairly rigid in the way that they're designed, so that, I mean, implementing this into my games almost guarantees that I either have to refactor this and decouple things and just, you know, use the logic to make my own more modular library, or just get in here and start hacking it so it specifically fits the particular project I'm working with. But either way, I'm not 100% sure that about the gains from that. It leads me to one conclusion, that I should always write my own controller, and understanding all of the bits and pieces will allow me to try and make a kind of generic controller. But what usually happens is, this is why I don't choose this one as the controller system, because there are possibly some other controllers that do provide what I'm looking for, ease of use. Even if it's a big system that I don't have to make a lot of modifications to, and like the first two we looked at, it would be at least I'm just adding abilities that I need within their system in order to um, customize it for my project. This one I have to modify the core of it in order to customize it for my project. So it may seem like I'm kind of giving up, and maybe I'll come back to this one if people request it, or if we get through some of the other things and um, head down a different direction of writing our own. But I think that my verdict on this is that is not what I want to use.